I think creativity is a way of opening up our minds to things we didn't know we wanted to think about or know. Creativity makes us interested and interesting. I think in this business, creativity is an economic multiplier. You apply creativity to anything and it matters more. I remember some of my first thoughts when I was thinking about being inspired in art and creativity. And my little neighborhood where my grandparents lived had tons of little children, and we would put on shows. And I took it very seriously. I couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, but it was like you would have thought that I was putting on a Broadway production. And I remember doing Cinderella, and I had to figure out how I was going to be Cinderella and the casting, and directing and how this was going to go over in the neighborhood. But I was the best, so I got to be Cinderella. But I mean, we built the stages, we did the costumes. I really do think that I was lucky enough to be surrounded by friends that were creative. And then another thing that I remember is my mom used to take us to the library when we were teeny. We would sit there with the record player and our little headphones because we didn't have enough money to have a record player. So we'd go to the library and she'd sit down and she goes, "You just need to listen to this. You need to know about this." And she made us listen to like Mozart and Bach. So I think my mom was a huge influence on exposing me to art and culture. I was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and it was, a little idyllic university town. My dad was in med school, my mom was a teacher. And then my dad decided that he didn't want to be married to my mom anymore and left. And my brother and I didn't quite understand, what was going on. And then my mom was a huge believer in education. And so she took a job at a private school, the best school, I think, in Greenville, Christ Church Episcopal School. That allowed us to go for free because we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, we got by, and it was the three of us, trying to make our way. But I think the person that really helped me with expressing myself was this woman, Pat Jackson, and she was my dance teacher. And she also did all the little theater shows. She was always starring in those. And it's like, that life looks awesome. It just looks so free. And quite frankly, I think when I was in high school, my ambition, this is hard to admit, but I just wanted to find a nice husband and have some children and live in North or South Carolina. Didn't work out that way. Found a really nice husband, but I have no children and I don't live in the Carolinas and I love Manhattan. I was clerking for a law firm when I was, I think, maybe 16 or 17. And I had to serve a subpoena on a company. And so I took off down 385 and drove up to Henderson Advertising. Ralph Callahan was the CEO at the time, I think. I walked in and, I had to say, "I'm here to serve you a subpoena." And I looked around and there were all these, people in like blue jeans and t-shirts. And then I saw, I think it was Snuggles or some character that I'd seen on TV. And I was like, "What is this place?" And they're like, "We do advertising." I'm like, "What's advertising?" And they're like, the commercial. I was like, "Oh, somebody has to write that stuff. Oh, that's interesting." And that was it, but I was like, I like that people come to work in blue jeans. I'd never seen that. Everybody I knew wore suits to work. And I was like, all right. And it just made an impression on me. And then years later, I was majoring in drama at UNC. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. But I thought it was too easy. And I thought, this is crazy. This obviously is not hard and I'm not challenging myself. I should do something more difficult. So I left the drama department and I went over to the journalism school. And they're like, you might like advertising. Why don't you go upstairs to the advertising part of the journalism school? I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And I met this professor, John Sweeney, And John had come from Chicago, had been a writer in Chicago. He's the reason I went to advertising. What I loved about it was you could be creative. You could exercise that muscle, you could play with that muscle, but it was structured in a business. And that's what had scared me about theater is when I was growing up doing theater, you know, you're sleeping in the back underneath the makeup table with a lot of interesting people. And I was like, do I want to do this? This feels a little scary. And the structure of the business of advertising felt like I could do creativity, but have some control over my career. John was really a huge influence, and he was terrified when I said I wanted to go to New York. I fell in love with Manhattan at 16. I came up for my birthday. It was electric. This city called me more than even advertising. And then, you know, I was lucky enough that when I got here in 1985, BBDO was on the cover of All the Trades as the advertising agency of the year. My mom always said, if you surround yourself with the best people, you have a better chance of being good. So I was like, well, all right, I'm gonna go to BBDO. And I went and said, hi, you know, I just graduated from college and I'm really interested in advertising and I'd love to do something here. And they were like, what can you do? And it turned out I could do nothing, you know. And so I became the receptionist bathroom break girl. So I would fill in for the receptionist when they left their desk. But I looked at it as, if I can just get in the door, I can turn the company into my university. And so fortunately, because I was the receptionist that was not full-time at any one desk, I had a lot of open time. And so the first thing I did was I called all the heads of the departments and asked if I could have an informative interview with them. And I got to know Phil Duesenberry. And the way I got to know a lot of the senior creatives like Phil is that I would moonlight and type all their scripts. And so I got to know, and by typing scripts, you start to see structure, you start to understand how you tell a story. So I would say that BBDO inspired me very much. And I think Phil was one of the pioneers of entertainment, that he truly felt advertising could sit beside other entertainment and hold its own. Thinking about creativity the way he did really made me feel that this was a noble profession, which is weird, because I think that's the last word people would think about when they think about advertising. And somebody said to me, which I think is fascinating, especially when I was thinking about, did I choose the right place to put my to be creative or put this time in? And what's really interesting is that, at least, I don't know if I could say it now, but when I was, really on the ground creating, more people would see what we made than any top writer, any top director. Films are films, books, music. Now, maybe not so much music, but was experienced by niche groups, whereas advertising was mass. And so the things that you did, everybody experienced.
Remember the old Snickers commercial where the woman's brushing the horse?
Eat 'em up.
And the guy interrupts her to ask her what time of day she enjoys a Snickers bar?
Look at that. Candy to candy that fell on the floor.
Why?
Oh, come on, man.
I'm Bill Curtis, and I'm faster than Floyd Mayweather.
I can make a difference in the world. I can push culture to a new place, and we're seeing that. And I think that advertising on its best day, marketing on its best day, actually looks at where the world needs to go and can push it there. Not leaning into stereotypes, pushing progressive images that you haven't seen, making you feel comfortable with the uncomfortable.
No. Look, the plot of this phone call just isn't working for me. It's ordinary, it's pedestrian, I've seen it a million times, okay?
Excuse me.
Excuse me, there's no edge. There's no edge to it. There's no edge to it. He's just got out of prison, all right? He's just got out of prison.
Daddy's in Cleveland.
No, get it, please. Okay, good.
I don't know how long ago someone gave me the book of Howard Gossage. Gossage said, people read things that are interesting to them. Sometimes it's an ad. And I think that's what Phil was getting to. you have every right to create stuff that people will find interesting. So, weirdly enough, when I got into this agency, I had read about people like Diane Rothschild and Mary Wells and Charlotte Beers, and they were all, their names were on doors. I'm leaving out a lot of women, but there were 10 awesome women, mostly on the creative side, doing incredible things, that running companies. I'd never seen that before in my life. And so weirdly enough, when I came into this industry, I was like, this is an industry that loves women. So I actually came in with this mindset of I was welcome. Every once in a while, I've been tempted to go to a small agency, and a couple of times some people have said, let's go start one. And I quickly realized I'm a big agency girl. And I think what I love about big agencies is the abundance of opportunity. I mean, I stayed at BBDO for 24 years and people were like, how? I was like, because it was changing all the time. Your brain, your mind just opened up and you dreamed as big as you could dream. I wanted to work on big brands where the work you did, you actually felt the impact.
I'm missing some beard.
Switch to the network with the best coverage, AT&T.
I worked on M&Ms for about 20 years, I think. We had said if we had gotten the M&M's characters right, people would actually believe they exist. That was our goal. It was like, how can we get them to not look like advertising characters and actually start to feel like the characters are human? So we wrote this spot where the M&Ms are coming around one corner and Santa Claus is putting gifts under the tree.
Ow!
So you think Santa will like these red and green M&Ms?
I don't know. I never met the guy. He does exist.
They do exist. Santa?
I love the simplicity of it, the charm of it, the sweetness of it, you know, and I look around the world today and those characters and what we wanted to do in entertainment, you know, is still there.
He does exist.
They do exist. Santa? Oh no.
And it was interesting, I was talking to a reporter years later and some M&M spot was running on Australia's ads or something, and she called for a little interview, and I said, you know, it's really interesting. I said, the only thing I can tell you is that when you look at the M&Ms, you would think that red would be the real jerk, but I said, yellow's really the asshole. He won't come out of the trailer, he's always late to set, and it's really difficult to work with him, but the red M&M is really, off camera, is the sweetest thing you'd ever meet. And she goes, I would have never thought that. And I was like, yeah, it's not true. It's like they don't exist. They're not real. The next thing that was significant for me was birthing Singular Wireless, which is that we pitched that business when it didn't even have a name. It took us 9 years, but 9 years of building something of that value and watching it go from a kind of a hard-hitting telecom retail place where we just were fighting for, you know, customers, to really developing a point of view in the world about self-expression and creativity.
Racing is fun. Everybody loves a good race. For example, I'm a twin. I was born first. I won. And that got me thinking about a new racing show idea. Twinner. First one out wins.
Pretty sure we can't do that.
It's doable.
Real racing fans want the real stuff. That's why Singular takes you behind the wheel with Jeff Burton and the legendary Richard Childress racing team. Only on Singular Video, raising the bar.
You can see a pattern here, which is the ideas I like are not an ad. It's a big, you know, big stuff. Again, big agencies, big stuff. But I went to Leo Burnett, and Allstate was one of the bigger brands. You know, you want to make a good hit out of the, you know, when you step up into a new job. And so I felt like Allstate was going to be a really interesting place to try to do something significant. There was a young man at the time, Matt Miller, who's gone on to do fairly well in this business. But he came in, he's like this young sort of guy, and he said, I have this idea. And his creative director at the time, Jeannie Caggiano, they showed me the script where it was the personification of mayhem.
I'm a teenage girl. My BFF Becky texts and says she's kissed Johnny. Well, that's a problem, because I like Johnny. Now I'm emotionally compromised and whoopsies.
It was only supposed to be a summer spot, which is what is the fun part of the story. It was like the summer spot. And I said, well, maybe it's gonna be bigger than a summer spot. Maybe this is a campaign.
I'm a random windstorm. Shaky.
I'm your football-obsessed best man.
I'm your GPS. Turn right up ahead.
Recalculating. Turn right now!
The idea of everyday mayhem and being protected from it feels bigger than an ad.
Mayhem, is that looking it off? Are you in good hands?
And then I moved to FCB. I think that at FCB, my favorite brand is FCB. That's where I put most of my attention the last 5 years, is how do we build this brand? And so the things that I was doing for clients, we've actually turned on ourselves and, said we're a brand too, so let's start building it. One of the first things I think is that we have to go look for creative talent, not advertising talent. I think our industry's gotten a little stale by teaching advertising. It's kind of like what Phil Dusenberry said to me, don't study the awards books, create the next thing. We're supposed to, on our best day, we do something that no one expected. It's like I never saw that way of approaching advertising. And so if we're all learning the same way into advertising, boy, what does that do? First of all, for creativity. And then, diversity. If we don't have diversity in the creative, in our agencies, we're not going to get to interesting things that we would have never thought about. I think it's also important that we address assimilation. I try to remember what it was like to be the only female in a room. I absolutely assimilated. I learned to drink liquor, I learned to smoke a cigar, I learned to play poker, I could talk sports, but I never talked about ballet, and I never leaned into pink colors. I think I would have been better if I had been in a situation where somebody had said, I'm interested in you. What's interesting to you? And asking those kind of questions when you have a diverse group of people makes them matter. I think the hardest part about progressing is that you learn more from when you fail than when you succeed, and the failures are hard. And you have to reframe them as, lessons learned. And when I'm in the middle of failing, I want to quit, I want to stop, I want it over. And when I get on the other side of failing, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna tell people never do that. So, okay, lesson learned, and to get through them, don't let them define you.